Hello and welcome to the Emerald City Video Podcast. I've even got green today. I know. Not that that makes any sense to the people who are listening to this on MP3.
Sure.
But today, this is Russ Burlingame, Zach Roberts with me today. We're going to be talking about this list that the BBC Culture released of the 100 greatest films of the 21st century. We're going to blast through this super quick, partially because a lot of these films I haven't seen, some of them Zach hasn't seen, and partially because we want to keep this down to like a 20-minute kind of, digestible thing. Just to do a quick intro to what that Zach and I have been talking about kind of offline. We've been talking about, I had wanted to do some 5 for 5 type of videos, 5 for 5 kind of mini podcasts, almost every 5 days, basically to be like, okay, you're coming back to the video store, you're getting another 5 movies, and we're going to tie it to some, entertainment event or news event or whatever's going on that's trendy that I can, attach it to on Twitter. And Zach brought up the possibility of like, let's keep those short, let's maybe add a timer element, and then, today he pointed out this list that it feels like we should probably address, because back when we were at Emerald City Video, we always used to get those posters. You remember the AFI used to do like, the 100 greatest of all time or whatever, and we get a poster for it. And I just remember sitting there and kind of like, I never really had any serious discussions with people, but I always remember, sorry, there's a car right outside that seems to be parked here. But I remember having, sitting and looking at these posters and being like, that one's good, that one's great, that one's what?
Yeah.
That one's AI? Yeah. So yeah, let's dive right in. I guess the first thing to start with is Mulholland Drive, because we've both seen it and it's number 1 on the list.
Yeah.
It's a weird inclusion to me. Like I really like a lot of David Lynch's stuff, and I thought that Mulholland Drive was a perfectly good movie, but to call it the best of the 21st century seems like a stretch. And in fact, I don't know that it's in the same conversation as most of the movies on this list.
Yeah. I'm double checking that they are weighted, that this list, which is probably something I should have checked out before, but I
assume they are, mostly because BBC lists them from 100 to 0.
Yeah. But I mean, especially the films that are along with it. It's just kind of 21st century. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a very confusing list, and putting Mulholland Drive, which I'll be the one kind of film snobbish person that has never liked David Lynch. But I didn't like that film. I didn't think it was all that amazing. I thought it was kind of what was the Scorsese film that won the Academy Award finally?
Oh, Gangs of New York, was it?
What was it? No,
was it
no, it was the
Aviator.
The other Leo DiCaprio film.
the Aviator, was it?
No, the other Leo DiCaprio film, the one that started with a D.
With a Departed.
Departed. I thought that was like the culmination. Like, okay, I'm going to take all the parts of a Scorsese film and put it in one film. And I kind of had that feeling with Mulholland Drive, where it was like, okay, fuck it, I'm just going to do the film that everybody think. I'm not going to try other things within the film. I'm just going to do a David Lynch film.
The one that everybody thinks I'm making anyway. I'm just going to prove them right.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, and that's why and also it was just one of those, it's like, anytime a film is just like trying to be scary for scary's sake or trying to be weird for weird's sake, I'm just kind of bored. I get bored by it really quickly. And yeah, that's kind of all. I haven't seen it in quite a long time, so I wouldn't get into it that much farther than that. But that's my entire remembrance of that film, is that I was just
the most interesting thing about that film to me is that apparently it was meant to be a sequel to Twin Peaks. At one point in its development, the main character was going to be Sherilyn Fenn's character from Twin Peaks, who somehow survived the explosion at the end of the show.
Okay. And
over the course of whatever, and presumably rights problems or whatever might happen, like, it became a different thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just because of the box office failure of Fire Walk with Me, who knows. But I haven't looked enough into it to really be able to speak with any kind of authority, except for the fact that Sherilyn Fenn says this over and over again in interviews. And so at some point you're kind of like, okay, well, clearly it's true.
Yeah.
Because this, who would have been the star of the movie, has repeated it. Although I guess if the BBC is saying it's the greatest of the century, maybe that's why she's so keen to keep repeating that story.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. There's elements of this list that are really cool because you see things on this list that I wouldn't think. Like, there's something uniquely kind of European about this list. There's certain things that I know for a fact if this were a U.S., if Time did this list. I guarantee that what's that called? Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind would have been on here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just number 2 wouldn't have been on there. In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai. Like, you go through basically the top 20, and there's like 10 of them wouldn't even be in the consideration. Like, I don't even think that number 17, Pan's Labyrinth, would be on the list because it's not. Maybe they would have picked something else by Del Toro, but I mean, there's also a very European edge to the American films that I mean, like, where I just like, well, crap, I mean, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I don't think that would be on any list, even though this is specified to the 21st century, so the last 16 years. I don't think that that would be on the greatest film with no qualifications list, of anybody. I mean, considering it didn't get any award love really when it came out, and hasn't really. It's had like a little bit of a cult following more, where like basically you find out your friend likes it, but that's about it. It's not like Fight Club or something like that it's only grown, and there's even more movie posters and stuff like that come out of it.
The fact that there's an animated film, and yes, it's Miyazaki, but still there's an animated film in literally the top 5. Spirited Away is number 4. It would never ever happen in the US.
And it's not a Disney film.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the first, as far as I can tell, the first Disney Pixar movie, and let's face it, if it's a Disney movie and it's on this list, it's going to be Pixar.
Yeah.
But the first Disney Pixar movie that shows up on this list, as far as I can tell, is WALL-E at number 29. Yeah. Which, I mean, I'm a genre guy anyway. I have no problem with the genre stuff and the animated stuff being on here. I like the idea. The only things that bother me being on here are the things that I feel like there's a lot of stuff where if you look back and like I don't think Training Day is on here. Yeah, it's not. And here's my thing. Training Day probably belongs on this list if The Wolf of Wall Street's on this list, because by the time The Wolf of Wall Street is as old as Training Day, it will have aged just as badly, if not worse.
Yeah.
Same thing with Inherent Vice. Like, there are just certain films where you're just like, yeah, it's a beautifully done film, but there's no there.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that, when we talk about 1999's movies, almost everybody kind of poo-poos American Beauty, in spite of the fact that it won 11 Oscars, I think it was, that year.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't stand up against the other films that came out that year that were kind of being John Malkovich and Fight Club. And I do want to say real quick, because as I was flipping through here, it occurred to me they have The 25th Hour on this list.
Yeah. That actually was one of those. That was actually the one that I was going to mention right off the bat. That said it was a very European. I mean, not only of Spike Lee films that they choose, which I guess this is. I'm trying to think of something else in the last 16 years that would have been maybe Inside Man, but not really. Yeah,
pretty much 25th Hour would be the one. And I mean, to be honest with you, 25th Hour would be the one for me too, because the performances push it. It's almost like it's almost not important that it's a Spike Lee movie. Like, yes, he makes a lot of important decisions to make the film better, but the screenplay and the performances, it would have been a good movie, a good solid movie, no matter who directed it. And so to me, it's almost kind of like everything else that Spike Lee has done has been so Spike Lee driven.
Yeah.
That it's hard to kind of call it as a complete film one of the best of the century.
Yeah. That like going in the vein of like films that I think both like amongst our group of friends and even film people, like the fact that Tree of Life is right up towards the top at crap, now I lost it. It's number 7, which I love that film because I love almost everything that Terrence Malick does. But that's shocking, especially considering I had to check. Like, you know, we have an ongoing discussion about Rotten Tomatoes as the site is issue, but 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. To get an idea of, I'm assuming that's mostly American audience, American reviewers and stuff like that, and then 60% audience score,
audience rating.
Yeah. So it's like it's the vast difference of why, again, I'll always be, like the film wise, it'll always be a European. I mean, if you go through my my top 7, I kind of previous video I kind of discussed that a lot, is that like half of the stuff was European, or at least even if it was kind of American, it was by a foreign director or something, but or had that edge to it. But that to me is really shocking, because that, like I was saying, like I love Malick, but that was a hard Malick. That was more so than Thin Red Line, you know? So, yeah.
I think it's interesting that, as far as I can tell, there are only 2 directors who are on here 3 times. I'm probably wrong because I'm just doing a quick search, and I'm trying not to keep getting the bonk noise that pops up when you're searching on a Mac. But it's Christopher Nolan and Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is interesting, by the way, because we've talked about comic book movies so much, because I'm a comic book guy and all that, there are actually 2 comic book movies on this list. Neither of them is really surprising, although a lot of people don't realize that A History of Violence is, in fact, a comic book movie. Is Road to Perdition, was that too old for this, or did they just leave it off? That was the other like comic book movie that nobody knows is a comic book movie.
I think that. No, it's 2002.
So they just didn't include that one.
It wasn't good, I think.
Well, I mean, but you know how that was, like, that was a darling. And again, like this, like it was a darling in the U.S. But again, like I'm just, as I was kind of prepping, I was looking at some of these movies, and I'm just like, you know, if this was an American list, there's no way in hell A Beautiful Mind and Training Day aren't on there. It's, you know, what really surprises me is that there's a Batman movie on here and there's no Harry Potter movie.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's, you know, I mean, that's something that it's going to be a whole side conversation that could be an argument between, you know, kind of fiction fanboys, whether it be Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and that kind of world, or comic book fanboys. But I can't think of a good, like a Academy Award level Harry Potter film. I don't think that any of the performances were there. I don't think that any of the, you know, I mean, the writing wasn't really there. I think, what was it, Cuarón did one.
Cuarón did one. David Yates did like 4 of them or something, and he's not bad, but he's not. Cuarón's
version was also, if I remember correctly, pretty shat upon by Harry Potter fans, because it was
I think
it went off in a different direction than, didn't do the, like, again, comic book fanboy similarity there, which is like, it missed this 12 page 482, the line was different, and it turned out to be probably the best film out of the entire series, in my opinion, at least as a film. But so
there's some of these that just frustrate the hell out of me, and I mean, this is kind of beating the same drum, but again, do we really think Inside Out is going to stand up in 5 years? Like, of all of Pixar's movies, like, it's the most forgettable. Like, I mean, and I know nobody else shares this opinion in terms of quality, but at least in terms of, like, being memorable and being it's like on the level of Cars to me.
Yeah.
Like it just, there's nothing there. And like to have that in the top 50, you're sitting here going like, okay, so you're telling me, and first of all, I think that actually makes it better than like some of the good ones. You know, because I know that they have some. Let's see, Ratatouille is 93. Ratatouille, I probably wouldn't have in the top 100 either. I mean, Finding Nemo is 96. I feel like Finding Nemo, like I don't particularly like it myself,
but by far
it
is. It not only did it get a sequel, so it's at least more popular, but also just so much so it has memorable characters. It has kind of the Disney-esque vibe to it.
Yeah.
And that this you know, I enjoyed Inside Out. It was a fun film. I don't know if it's not, you know, I have never done a rant, I suppose, on any of these podcasts yet about my absolute worship and love for Lilo and Stitch. It's no Lilo and Stitch even. And within the Disney world, Lilo and Stitch is kind of a cult film.
Yeah.
So, but it's memorable for like a couple weeks. But I mean, like the big difference between Disney Pixar films and maybe other animated films, you know, I mean, to me, that's kind of in the world of Ice Age, where the first Ice Age.
No, I would agree.
Where it's just like, yeah, it's memorable, it's very interesting, and it's cute, and it's whatever. But you know, or even a Shrek or something like that. But maybe not even at a Shrek level, because you know, Shrek had this. You know, obviously it was based on something, but it had like the whole. It built an entire world, and this was by its own nature. It was just inside the girl's head, and you know, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just.
Which again, Shrek, by the way, is another. It's from 2001. That's not on this list. Which I think, if this was an American one, especially you've got like, I think 8 animated films in the top 100, and I have a really hard time believing that Ratatouille makes this list, and Shrek does not, especially if this is an American. You know.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at something. Yeah, Up is not on here. And Up is 2009, and at least like among most people that I've talked to, is generally considered the best of the Pixar movies in terms of like actual, like, you know.
Yeah. In the terms of like emotional weeping that Toy Story gave you as a child. Like that's the kind of film that I remember. Like there's Toy Story that kind of everybody in our, I don't know, when the hell did Toy Story even come out? I was such a kid. 95. So we were 14, 15, but like, you know, either our little brothers and sisters or just in general, like you went there, you know, if you're old enough, you went there that's the film you went to, with your girlfriend with or something like that. But like you wept at that film. Like it built it up, and it was like, it was massively effective the way that Pixar films kind of drive and strive to be. And Up to me was the kind of the next film that did that. I mean, there's great films like Incredibles and other films, but yeah, that's shocking that Up. That seems like almost just they made a mistake. Like there's no logic there, but
and it's some of these are really interesting to me. Like, and again, we don't want to get into like trying to talk about every single one of these, but like just gonna go down through a couple of these things real quick that I'm like, holy crap, I really didn't expect that to be there.
Yeah.
Almost Famous, which is, you know, I love that movie. It's far and away to me Cameron Crowe's best film, but really surprised it's on here. And again, I feel like it wouldn't be if it was American. Before Sunset. First of all, if this was an American list, I feel like they would have included Before Midnight instead of Before Sunset, just because the movies get quote unquote better and better as they go, according to the critics. Sunset's actually my favorite, so A, I'm happy to see it on here, and B, I'm kind of happy it's on there instead of Midnight. There's some really weird choices. Like, okay, I get like you want certain filmmakers to be represented, but really is Zodiac David Fincher's best? And it's number 12.
Yeah.
You're sitting here going, okay, so according to this, Zodiac is 13 spots better than Memento.
Yeah.
That doesn't even I prefer Fincher to Christopher Nolan. Yeah. And there's just that's not even kind of true. So to me, like, it's weird, like looking at some of the stuff that I'm like, and like, I know everybody but me loves fucking Baz Luhrmann, but what the fuck is Moulin Rouge doing in the top 100 greatest films of the last 15 years?
Like, I mean, I mean, if you're thinking, if there's some, you know, I guess if you're putting together a top 100 list of great films, you got to have some sort of, I need to have a handful of musicals. I need to have a handful, like a mixture thing. And musicals, yeah, it is. I mean, it is definitely the best. It is one of the best. I mean, it's certainly the most memorable, you know, and
it's such a fucking terrible film. Like, it's just egregious. I mean, they could have used Chicago. It's not even
no Queen Latifah, but yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I think again, if like, you know, he's one of the more well-known directors. I mean, I don't know if I'd put it on my top 100 list, but my top 100 list would probably have 60 different films on it.
Yeah,
you know? And
that's the other thing. Like, and again, like, because we're trying to burn through this, do a fairly short. Like, there's no way we're gonna touch on everything. But like, in the same way that you looked at this and you're like, how the fuck is AI on here?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean,
that's my immediate response to Moulin Rouge. I'm like, no, just no.
Yeah.
One thing I will touch on, Amelie, which, I mean, I'm not surprised it's on here, especially because it's a European list. I think if it was an American list, that movie probably would have been forgotten by now. I am kind of surprised that because of the nature of the film, like how artsy it is and how stylized it is, I'm kind of surprised that it made the list and that it's so low. Like, I kind of feel like it's the kind of movie where if you're going to accept it, it's going to be in the top 25 because it's either there for you or it's not. So it's a weird, and I'd love to know how they weighted these things and what the metric is and how things ended up on certain parts of the list. But Amelie was a surprise, not that it was there so much as because like I figured it would either not be there at all or it would be super high. Yeah. And so to have it barely on the list is kind of like, okay, sure.
It's you know, and like there's so many things. Like I'm doing the quick, like obviously
the scan.
You know, like my scan of like top to bottom. Like films that I'm like, what in the fuck is this doing on the list at all?
Yeah.
You know, just quickly going through, Her.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, good film, but not a top 100 of, you know, a top film of the year. Maybe I guess maybe if you're like just doing top 10s and it would have made it in there.
Or maybe somebody just really wanted Spike Jonze on this list. I mean,
that's occasionally what I feel. There's like a handful of films in there. Well, it's like why is AI on there? Like why in the world?
Because Spielberg hasn't made a good fucking film in 20 years, and so you gotta just pick one.
Yeah, and I guess that, you know. Since you know, he only made like half of that film, but anyway, that's a whole backstory. But yeah, I mean, you go Wolf of Wall Street. I guess that in the moment, Inherent Vice is kind of the same deal. Where like I feel like if this list is made in 5 years, those films will know. People will go, I don't remember those. Spring Breakers.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, really?
Like I know it was an artsy, and like we decided to like make it a thing that's like it's an independent film thing. But like I don't know there. Like I actually just Googled to make sure that I wasn't.
That it was the one you're thinking
I'm like, okay, maybe because I don't recognize the director, but I'm like, really? Like the film was better than I thought it would be, considering the cast and everything. But like it wasn't the film that you finally were like, oh my god, Vanessa Hudgens can act and Selena Gomez actually can act if they're given a script. They did okay, but it's not like Jim Carrey in Truman Show or something like that where you're like, holy mother of God. Like like this guy that did, you know, usually makes fart voices, you know, like, but like, I mean, there's a lot of, I'm happy that Zero Dark 30, Hurt Locker, I'll completely go with you on that. But Zero Dark 30, I don't get, especially for a European list, considering its, you know, its history. Like maybe if this had been made in 2012, I like that film more than anyone I know did when it came out. Mm-hmm. But having watched it again, I don't believe that the technical aspects are there to make it a good film. I always say that like that film for me is pisses me off because it's the film that kind of ruined the greatest true action film of the last 50 years, because now it's hard to do the killing of bin Laden story, which is to me the great, you know, I mean, like, it has everything. I mean, like, how do you do that film and Zero Dark 30 is what you produce? Like, but yeah, I mean, just.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I mean, to me, if I'm going down through this list, like, between the stuff that I haven't seen and the stuff that I don't care for and the stuff that I'm just like, huh? Yeah. There's, you know, I could put together a list on here that if I'm like tunnel visioning and I'm saying like, okay, I'm going to ignore all the stuff that they omitted from this list, and I'm going to ignore all the stuff that they put on here that I don't think belongs on the list. Like, I could make probably a good top 10 list that I would be reasonably confident in saying like, yeah, this could be my top 10 for this period of time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, so yeah, there's Amelie, Almost Famous, Before Sunset, Royal Tenenbaums. You know, as you start to go down the list and you're like, there's enough here that I could be pretty happy with this list. But some of them are really random.
Yeah.
And some of them feel like statement things. Like, what's Sarah Polley's movie doing on here? Yeah. Like, I guess it was good, but really?
Top 100 good?
Yeah. And so like that kind of stuff puzzles me a little bit. And I wonder what, like, if there's a political component or if there's some, you know, if there, I mean,
yeah.
Actually, no. There. By the way, there's another comic book movie. Speaking of political components, blue is the warmest color.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, it's a good list. I think that it's like, to me, like half of it doesn't work in terms of best of ever.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty much always going to happen with these things.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yep. Lost for a minute.
I was muting myself so that I could sneeze, and then you started looking confused, and I stopped having to sneeze.
Ah. Well, that worked out well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, like, I again, it ends up being my kind of self-propelling prophecy of liking foreign media and foreign better than American, because I think that America, like, we'd be seeing more Spielberg films on there because he's Spielberg and whatever, even though, again, I guess AI is the best thing he's done. Like, 2000, like, I feel like I have to look that up. But again, the one thing and I suppose we should probably, for trying to keep it under 20, which I think we're past 20 at this point already, is the one thing that this list really slammed home is, wow, some of these films like Memento, 25th Hour, or I guess 25th Hour, I knew obviously it would have been after 2000, but I can't believe exactly. There's a lot of films on here that I just have like locked in my head that like I saw in high school or whatever, but like AI, like Moulin Rouge, films like that I have this distinct memory of being in the 90s, and I
really felt like Almost Famous. I always like, I think of it as being part of that like 1999 bubble of movies. Yeah. Probably because you and I used to watch it all the time on a loop with Fight Club and the trailer. All right, yeah. Just to give this kind of a sense of direction as we wrap up, is there like, if there was one movie that you like really feel like, okay, this needed to have been included on this list and it wasn't, can you think of anything?
Odd. I'm trying to, you know, it's I've got my one Spike Lee film that would be on there. I've got it's weird to me that the only Tarantino movies on here or the only Tarantino movie on here is Inglourious Basterds. Like, I don't object to that. It's just kind of surprising. The fact that I never get this right. The Charlie Kaufman film, Cineductor. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The fact that is on there, because that's one of those films that I think it's one of those films that I think is technically and art wise, like cinema as art. Yeah. One of the most important films made in God knows how long. But I like, if this was an American list, I would never, you would never see that film
No.
on this. I can't imagine in a world, even if you polled like artsy, people more than you polled like, I don't know who's alive now as reviewers, even though like the New York Times people like, and like for me, like the fact that Children of Men is on here, I'm just happy. But it's again, it ends up being like, for the most part, I off the top of my head, I can't think of any film like immediately that's like, why the hell isn't that on there?
There's a few that like for me, like the one that comes into my head, and I know exactly this is what we're talking about because it's not an American list. This wouldn't make sense to be on there. Like I would feel compelled to at least make an argument for Bowling for Columbine. I also think like when I just think of like what was going through me at that time, like 21 Grams or The Station Agent are films that feel like they could totally be on this list if people remember that they existed.
Yeah.
And again, like that's kind of nickeling and diming. But to me, like if I had one thing that I'd be like, no, I got to argue for this to be on the list, it would be Bowling for Columbine, because I'm kind of sitting here going like, as an American at least, like that movie was an important cultural touchstone, and like it made documentaries relevant for 5 minutes, and it really has. I mean, 10 years on or whatever, 15 years on, it really has dramatically changed the face of the gun conversation in America. We're still not getting anything done. Yeah, but it's changed the way that we talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's confusing. God, I'm trying to. Shit, I just lost it again.
By the way, there's no Tim Burton on this list either, which, not that he's done anything in 15 years to deserve a spot on the list, but if this was an American list, Big Fish would be on here on principle.
I just say I think I would have if I was on this doing this list, I would have just added like the new Ghostbusters just to piss the living shit out of people. But no,
Batman v Superman.
Yeah, exactly. That probably would have melted everybody's brain. But 300's not on there. There's no. But I mean, I think it's to quote Schindler's List, it's a good list. And
we're gonna shit all over Spielberg for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna end on that note.
Exactly. Yeah.
But at least The Passion of the Christ isn't on there.
Yeah, it's true. And again, that's a weird movie because I can't picture that film being in the last 16 years for some reason. Like,
the only reason I know that it was because I remember being at Emerald City Video when that came out. Like I remember that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel
just such a weird, like, I think of these things and I'm just like, it's so many of the things that like when they came out at the video store, you're just like, oh man, this is going to be around forever. And you're just like, yeah, like the things that we remember from the last 15 years, and again, we shouldn't get too far into this because this will totally derail, but like the things that people remember, like the things that endure, and not, this is the difference between your 7 favorite films hashtag and, the greatest films of all time. But the things that endure, the things that you remember, the things that you talk about are so different than what's on this list. I mean, like, if you're talking to me about my 100 best anything of the last 15 years, Shaun of the Dead's got to be on the list. And
I mean, that's where I have a hard time as a fan of film and as a, like, if you're reviewing something. I mean, like, a greatest, like, you really have to kind of go into what to kind of like define, like that's something I feel like it's missing from here. Is that like the
context of what great is?
I need a definition of greatest, because if Ratatouille and and a handful of other of those felt like if Inside it, my God, I'm blanking. I'm having a brain collapse right now. But if a handful of those Pixar films are on there, then greatest doesn't necessarily mean like
high art
importance and like an importance within cinema. Like, I'm not, the fact that Old Boy is sitting right next to Wall-E, and then below that is Talk to Her by by Andromeda, and then like 2 more down, 3 more down from there is P.T. Anderson's The Master, which I thought was complete and utter garbage. Yeah, even though I love his work.
No, I'm the same. I love Anderson in general.
I mean,
movie doesn't do anything for me.
I think we got to talk about the fact, which we didn't mention, the fact that Mad Max Fury Road is on there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that that's kind of one of those. Mad Max Fury Road has become this kind of bold declaration of new classic status, to quote
Yeah.
High Fidelity. It's this thing of like, we're gonna make all these really safe, really obvious picks, and then like there's a couple we can slip in there to show that we're cool. And I feel like the Pixar is a safe way to show that you're cool. The Dark Knight is a safe way to show that you're cool. And now, like the granddaddy of all the safe pick to show that you're cool is Mad Max Fury Road.
So I've been Googling other people's lists because I feel like Birdman is not on there, which I guess that actually would be for me one of those films that, because it did a lot of things that when you consider great films that they do, it tried massively new things. It played with stereotypes, threw them out the window. The editing was ridiculous. The music was great. Michael Keaton, even though we all know that he could act, kind of like exploded, as a holy crap, this Batman can actually act, and the fact, I mean, like just even going through, this is a list from IndieWire. Gravity is not on there. Be surprising. Like, really, Night Moves is on their list. That's interesting. But there's like, there's a lot of like indie films that I'm surprised. Nightcrawler isn't on there.
And sometimes I see some of these and I'm like, when we're talking about this, okay, Up and Gravity aren't on the list, but The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford is on the list. Yeah. And it's like, it's not even that I don't like that movie. I actually really like that movie. Yeah. But like, I don't see, like, from a critical point of view, from a populist point of view, like, I just don't see how that decision happens. Yeah. Like, I don't see how you hold those two movies next to each other and you're like, oh, we're going to leave Up off, but we're going to have The Assassination and we're going to have Ratatouille.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, no, you can trade those two for Up and still get change back.
Yeah. And no Black Swan.
Yeah, that's true.
That's, I mean, like, this actually, this is a pretty good list. I'm looking at IndieWire's 50 best films of the decade so far.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of similarities here. Melancholia is on there. The Hunt isn't on there. I mean, there's
well, and there's certain things that, like, for me, it's like a lot of what you said about Birdman for me would go for what was that Pedro Almodovar 21 Grams.
Yeah.
Like 21 Grams, that was like 2003, I think, but like that movie blew me away at the time, and it probably doesn't hold up now. But a lot of these movies don't actually hold up now if you try to watch them again with fresh eyes. They're coasting on reputation. I mean, I don't think anybody really thinks that Brokeback Mountain holds up all that much better than Chasing Amy. If you're being honest with yourself about anything except for the fact that it had some social significance. And if you're looking at social significance as a factor, then that's when you get into the Bowling for Columbine conversation.
Yeah. I mean, but that's always, and that's again why I would really love to have a wider discussion on what is, how do you get about lists? Did you just give a list? Because I mean, like I said, my consideration of what greatest films of all time is different than probably yours. Right. I mean, like I personally would not, maybe on a much, much larger list, as much as I love the Simon Pegg films, the Edgar Wright films. They're among my personal favorite films. The whole trilogy is on probably my top 25. But I wouldn't put them in greatest films. Like,
well, and that was like when I said that, it was like I've been kind of toggling back and forth between like personal and kind of quote unquote professional term, ideas of greatness. But like it's kind of that larger point of like, how do you define this? Because to me, like there is a metric by which you can call those movies great. I don't think that it would make my list if I had to objectively do what they're doing here.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like we don't really know what they're doing here.
Yeah.
And also, I do think that one of the things that these lists consistently do, and the Oscars consistently do, like, there's never any fucking comedies. Like even Birdman, like it's a black comedy, but at least it's like there's some humor to it.
Yeah.
Like, you look at this list and like think of the things that even in a very liberal sense of the term could be considered comedies.
Yeah.
And it's like there's probably maybe a half dozen of them tops.
Yeah.
I
mean, not even the animated films are comedies. You know, I mean,
I think Inside Out could be a comedy.
Yeah, I remember crying a lot during it. So, but that was one of the most manipulated films like in the history of cinema. But yeah, I mean, there's no. I don't see one.
Yeah, I mean, the animated films are always weird because like they have to, like, the nature of animation is that pretty much everything includes humor.
Yeah.
Wolf of Wall Street, I guess you could call a comedy. Almost Famous, you could call a comedy. Amelie, I know, has been called a comedy. I've never understood that.
I think that all of those films, though, if you know, to keep with the
the Wes Anderson movies, that, like, I'll give them that one, Wes Anderson.
But would you, you know, I mean, to keep with the theme of this podcast, would you put them in comedy?
Some, not really. I mean, most of those, no. The Wes Andersons, I would, if not for the fact that I'm sure he was probably on the Great Director's Wall by the end. Yeah, I mean, pretty much of the things that we're talking about here, the only things that would actually go in comedy at the video store are probably the Wes Anderson movies. Yeah. Definitely, if somebody came to me and said, you know, hey, here's this list, you know, I'm giving you the BBC Top 100 list. I'm going to start working through these, but I want to start with a comedy today because that's the mood I'm in. What am I taking home? Yeah. My answer is like Finding Nemo or Roll Tenenbaums. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even, you know, again, even with the most liberal definitions, anything else on here that could be a comedy is still like gonna make you cry.
Like, get stoned and drunk, and maybe you'll find Zero Dark 30 humorous. Like, that's a goal.
All right. Well, unless you have something else you want to say about the list, that seems like a perfect list.
Thanks. Yeah, no. You know, City of God is on there. It's the first time I've seen that on a list in a while, if I can remember. I mean,
yeah.
But
it's one of those movies I always see. Like when we went to Movie Gallery the other day, or not Movie Gallery, when we went to Family Video the other day, and I was walking through the stacks. It's like, oh shit, City of God's here. I remember that movie. Yeah. And it's funny because so many of the things on this list are things that I don't really remember until they're until they're right there in front of me. And so maybe that's a little bit of a rebuttal to my own argument that a lot of these things will be forgotten in 2 years.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, again, I feel like you sit people down with a blindfold, you don't tell them what year it is, and you make them watch 21 Grams and The Wolf of Wall Street, and 8 out of 10 of the people who are making this list, especially this pretentious and Eurocentric list, are going to be like, oh yeah, 21 Grams easily.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, when you look at some of these things, and it's impossible to avoid, like, because unless you want to set up the rule that, like, it can't have come out in the last 48 months. And so, like, you know, sorry, Mad Max, sorry, Wolf of Wall Street, you can't be here. Like, unless you want to set up some arbitrary rule, there's no real way to avoid kind of that moment of like, oh yeah, I love X, you know?
Yeah.
So, but, all right. Well, thanks to the people who are listening to this for listening to us dissect this list. Hopefully some of that made some kind of sense. I think that if you were sitting here at the video store and we're all looking at the list together, it made a whole lot more sense. So maybe if you got to the end of this and you're like, what the hell were they just talking about? Start it all over again, double up our views, and have the list in front of you this time.
Please do.
All right. Thanks very much, C, and I'll talk to everybody soon.
See you later.